Let's go to the COVID-19 response, when actors, I think, have been some of the hardest hit around the world to get on film sets everywhere. It was required the mask wearing, it was required the jabs. Were you somebody who questioned it before your injury that you've had?
Oh, 100%. I looked at the stats and look at the fact that 98.4% chance of survival. But the
From
drive,
COVID.
From COVID. But to have us jabbed, I couldn't see any sense in it. I was willing to take the chance on the 1.6 chance of survival. Yeah. Especially when I was looking at things like the CDC were coming out with 75% of the people who were dying had age 81, and there were 4 more comorbidities. So for myself, I thought my choice would have been no.
Well, you were hugely fit. You obviously ate well. You were looking after your body. You really did have it at peak fitness for that program.
Absolutely. I hit a niche in my market. So as far as actors go, I'm a decent actor who has a physique that carries me into certain roles.
And still has that, even with this injury. What happened? How did the injury come about?
It was second jab. So the first one I cruised through. In fact, all the lockdowns, the jabs, I was still training 6 times a week. When we were locked down, I had a garage full of gym equipment. So I would train every single day, sometimes twice a day. On the second jab, within 12 to 24 hours, I couldn't get out of my seat. So it was like chronic fatigue syndrome. My legs filled up with fluids, so if I had my socks on, which is acted like a dam, and it would build up fluid so that my skin was hanging out of my socks. It looked hideous. It was unmissable. I got block gag reflex, so if I tried to do anything like cardio, even going up and down my driveway, it would fill up with air underneath my esophagus so that I couldn't burp, I couldn't pass air, I couldn't do cardio. I'd have to find a position to move my body into so I could release the air. I got crawling skin, which I still have to this day. The heart palpitations, headaches.
Explain the crawling skin, because there'll be others who recognise this.
It feels like something is moving underneath my back and the backs of my arms. It's predominantly back and backs of my arms. So if my clothing touches my skin, it just feels horrible. It feels icky. It's like ants moving under your skin.
Are you wanting to itch that all the time?
All the time.
And when did the shaking start?
The shaking was interesting for me because I had all this other stuff. It wasn't something that I really paid attention to. So I'm also a motocross rider, and I still try to ride a motocross bike, but it's a little hard at the moment. I had an injury where the guys who were looking at, the doctor was looking at it, thought that I had the tendons jamming in the sheath in my hand, so that my hand was starting to curl, and I had a name for it, I can't remember. But it came good on its own. I just rehabbed it and I worked it through, and it came good on its own. So I thought when the tremor started that it was something to do with that. So it's just my little finger would start going, and then my thumb started going. And then my arm started going, my hand started going, and it worked its way up my arm. It's so bad now that if I get emotional, it flaps like a fish. And if I'm sleeping and I'm dreaming, so it's not like I'm doing something physical. If I'm dreaming and the dream's a little intense, my hand starts to go crazy. It wakes my wife and myself up.
Barry, you didn't have signs of Parkinson's or any previous
None
health
in the family,
issues?
no health issues. I haven't been in a hospital.
You've never had that swelling in your legs before?
No.
Okay, so what did the doctors say? What happened when you went to the hospital?
Well, I'm a competition bodybuilder. And like I said in the initial interview, I didn't want anybody to know or to think that I hadn't lived a life. So when I was a competition bodybuilder, I had used steroids. And I had competed with them. I'd been in the party scene, so I had used recreational drugs. I didn't want anybody to think I was lying about that. What they put it down to was that within 12 hours of me having the second jab is that my life had caught up with me. So it was all just a massive coincidence.
That's what they said?
Yes.
But it was not to do with the jab itself?
No, they called it cardiac myopathy, but it was 4 to 5 months before they got me in to see a cardiologist from the time that I presented with all the symptoms. And when I presented with all the symptoms, they largely ignored most of them, and then attached what they could to cardiac myopathy. And do you know what cardiac myopathy is?
I myself had pericarditis, but explain it for people who are not aware. There are so many different versions of cardiac problems now.
Well, cardiac myopathy is thickening of the left ventricle, so it's thickening of the heart wall. I have 92% usage of my heart. So with it, it's taken something like 8%, which I think are pretty damn good odds. if you're a bodybuilder and you use steroids, 100% of bodybuilders who use steroids will get this. What they don't tell you is that 46%, something like that, is if you don't take them and you weight train, you'll still get it. So if I had not told them, they wouldn't have known.
Goodness. But this is what I understand, that they go through a person's history and try to find some cause other than the jab. That's what I've had from many of the jab injured that I've interviewed. It's as if they want to find other causes from your past.
That's exactly what happened with me. But I was straight open. I'm very honest. I'm an open book. I see no point in lying about what I've done with my life. I just found it really ridiculous that they would say that within 12 hours of having the jab, that all of that other stuff suddenly went caught up with me.
Barry, how did that feel to go to hospital to get help? You are somebody who depends on your body for your career. You're going to the hospital to get help now. You're realizing this could have damaged me, and you are absolutely gaslit.
I was frustrated, angry, more so than I was furious. But over time, I've come to actually accept this. It's something I live with now. I was just. It was a running battle every single day. Every doctor I spoke to, the same thing. My own doctor started out that way. In fact, my own doctor laughed when I gave him the dates. My own doctor now, though, has turned around and he's at least looking at this. And I really want to believe that he was suppressed. I really want to believe that they're suppressed.
What do you mean by suppressed?
Well, I'll give you, for instance, I went for a cardiac MRI. They packed me into the tube, and when they couldn't get the tremor to stop, so they had to keep packing more and more and more packing in with me.
Explain that. What are you meaning? Packed you into the tube?
I'm in an MRI tube and I'm packed in like this. But because they packed me in here, as soon as they packed my hand in, my arm would start shaking all the way up to the shoulder, and then they couldn't get the scan or the MRI on my heart properly. So they kept packing it and bring me out, pack me in more, then they put the dye in and they packed in more. And when I came out of it, I had an anxiety attack. So I was fine while I was in the tube, but when I got out, I had an anxiety attack. And there was this really great nurse. And she came up and she just held me. And she started talking to me and she said, "Is this Parkinson's?" And I said, "No." I told her my story. And I said, "But I can't definitively say it is," which is really making me crazy because every time I talk to someone, they're trying to tell me that it's not. That everything I've gone through is not what I think it is. Yes. That everything I've gone through is not attached to the timeline. And she looked at me and straight in the eye and she said to me, she said, "Barry, I see hundreds of people coming through these doors that have exactly the same as you. So you're not crazy." And I wasn't going to do this.
How did that feel to be acknowledged, Barry?
It felt great. But I walked out of there and my wife had to walk me out of the hospital because the anxiety attack just ripped me to pieces.
How many of those have you had?
Since the suicide attempt, on a daily basis, 4 or 5 a day. Since I've been off the drugs, I've been a whole lot better though.
Even now you're having 4 or 5 a day?
No. No, now if I get in an emotional state, if I'm talking about it, so if talking about it is really difficult. If I'm talking about it with someone I don't know, it's a third person. So someone asks me, said, "Oh, well, I heard about this," and I tell them, it's a third person conversation. It's like I'm talking about somebody else. If I talk to it about people I care about and the emotions are involved, then they come out.
Is it too hard to keep going?
No.
Tell me if this is invasive.
Okay.
The reason I'm asking questions is not to be invasive. Or
I know.
I'm simply asking because I think it will help many others.
I said I wasn't going to do this, and I'm not. I'm getting through this.
But I think there is, for me, there's a great strength. A real warrior has the strength to be vulnerable. It shows me your strength. To show that side to the world is something that will help others. I don't see it. I just feel terrified, to tell you the truth. Half of my day is in terror. Why, Barry?
I don't know what's coming next. And my head is I try to be as positive as I possibly can. But with what's happened, and it's been one after the other, after the other, after the other, you can't help but wander into a place where you go, what is coming next? Sometimes thinking about it, it'd honestly be easier to just die than go through something that's so debilitating.
Tell me about the suicide attempts you mentioned. Is that too painful to go there?
Nope. They called the tremors Parkinson's straight away. Now, I know my wife and I have talked to them and said, how do you know? There is no real test for Parkinson's. How do you know? And they said, oh, well, you've got this many of the 100 and something markers for Parkinson's, so we're going to call it Parkinson's. So they put me on this drug called Cinemet. Now, Cinemet, they started with a quarter tab, and it was a quarter tab a day, and then another quarter, and another quarter, until they build you all the way up to a full dose, which works out to be 3 tablets a day. By the time I got there, I had no idea who I was. I can literally tell you, I walked home one day, and pardon my French, but this is exactly how I said it. I looked in the mirror at myself, and I went, who the fuck are you? And I was angry at myself because I didn't know. And then I walked upstairs, I went past my wife, I told her that I can't talk to her, she was on her way to work, so I passed her. I went upstairs and I took a Cinemet. Now, I keep asking this myself, who would want to commit suicide but take a drug for Parkinson's? So who would do that? Would go upstairs and you go, I'm going to kill myself, but I'll just take this to help the Parkinson's. So I took a Cinemet, and then I took 2 sleeping tablets, and I just wanted to sleep this off. And then I woke up 14 hours later in the ICU with ligature marks around my neck where I'd tried to string myself up. And I'd taken the remainder of the sleeping tablets in my house.
Barry, when was this?
This was about 4 months ago.
4 months?
That's when the anxiety attacks started. Most of them. 2 days before that attempt, I got a pay rise. It would be a really happy moment for anybody, right? My wife's a teacher, so she's teaching on the stage. I walked through the crowd that she was teaching and had just finished the class, and I walked through to hand her the paperwork to show her that I got a pay rise, and burst into tears uncontrollably. Who does that?
A pay rise from whom?
From my workplace, from my boss. Now, my work is great. They've handled us so well.
What work are you doing?
I work in a gym.
How supportive are they?
Incredibly so.
Do you want to name the gym?
No, I won't.
You are a man of incredible courage. Incredible
Doesn't feel like
courage.
it, Liz.
What is it doing when you're training? Because look at how fit you are, and yet you are this injured.
It's all I've got to hold on to.
Explain that.
I used to be able to go home and I'd be able to focus on working on a screenplay or promoting my work. And that was my safe ground. That was my sanity place. So I'd go there, and when I did that, I'd be creating worlds, I'd be creating characters, and I was in such a happy place. I haven't been able to do it. I haven't been able to focus properly to be able to do any of that.
What do you put that down to?
I don't know.
Are you still on many drugs?
None. In fact, they wanted to put me on an antidepressant and I absolutely refused. The moment that they said, we'll put you on an antidepressant and when you come off it, it may make you anxious, I went, well, what's what you're putting me on it for in the first place? Why do I want to do that?
Wise man. And are you off those Parkinson's drugs?
Yes. I didn't know who I was on the Parkinson's drugs.
When you described to the doctors what you had done, when they saw that, did they, and you still say, I believe this is the jab, did they soften at all? Did they stop the gaslighting?
No, but like I saw the cardiologist yesterday. That cardiologist was so frustrated and so angry, not at me. I don't know what it was, but I could see it in his face and the way he spoke. And when I talked to him about it, you could see the frustration in him. Maybe he wanted to say something, but couldn't say something.
Explain that. What was he saying? How was his anger coming out?
It was just an attitude rather than something he was saying. And I can say this. He did say to us, he said, our health system is a mess. I can't get you in for another cardiac MRI for another 18 months. It took me 18 months to get the first one.
Can I just say here, please, could any doctors, and this is going around the UK and we'll come back to New Zealand, around the world we need doctors and nurses as whistleblowers now, don't we? We need,
absolutely.
We need them to tell the people what they are seeing. They have the evidence that will stop this. People like you suffering because you are not being acknowledged.
Absolutely.
Barry, in the midst of all of this, had you been acknowledged, had a doctor said, I know this is the jab, we're going to treat it as a jab injury.
No,
we're going to get you.
None.
Would that have helped you? Would that have prevented this urge to end your life?
Well, you know what, Liz?